It was a calm, bright morning. The kind of morning where the sunlight streams softly through the trees and the air smells faintly of fresh grass and coffee from nearby cafes. The neighborhood was quiet, and the streets were mostly empty except for a few people walking to work or taking their morning jog. On this ordinary day, a small family prepared to step into a place they had never imagined would turn into such a memorable experience. The mother, a tall, confident woman with a warm smile, held the hands of her 3 children. They were triplets, all around 7 years old, and their excitement was clear in the way they bounced on their heels, their eyes wide and curious. Each of them carried a small, brightly colored piggy bank, clutched tightly against their chests. The mother had explained to them that today was special. They were going to a bank to open their first savings accounts, a step toward learning how to manage money, save for the future, and take responsibility in a world that was already teaching them lessons in ways both big and small. The children chatted excitedly as they approached the bank, pointing at the polished windows and the large doors that gleamed in the morning sun. Their laughter rang out, innocent and free, as they imagined the coins and bills inside their piggy banks growing into real money, ready to be spent on dreams they had yet to fully understand. The mother smiled, watching them with a mixture of pride and mild nervousness. She knew that teaching children about money was important, but she also knew that life had a way of testing even the simplest lessons. Today, however, she had hoped would be simple. As they reached the entrance of the bank, the mother pushed open the heavy glass doors. The interior smelled faintly of polished wood and paper, with the soft hum of computers and the quiet conversations of bank employees in the background. Everything seemed ordinary, almost comforting, and the mother relaxed slightly. The children ran ahead a little, their small shoes tapping on the polished floor, and peered curiously at the counters, the chairs, and the little pamphlets that promised financial growth and security. But in one corner of the bank, a man noticed them differently. The bank manager, a man in his 40s with neatly combed hair and a crisp suit, glanced at the family as they entered. At first, he thought nothing of it, just a mother and her children here on an ordinary errand. But as he watched them more closely, a feeling he could not quite explain settled over him. There was something in the way the children moved, the way they carried themselves, or perhaps the way they looked that made him uneasy. He could not put his finger on it, but he felt a nervous energy rise in him. The children, unaware of the judgmental gaze, approached the counter cheerfully. "Good morning," one of them said, his voice full of excitement. His siblings echoed the greeting, their small voices blending in harmony. The mother followed behind, keeping a careful eye on them as she approached the same counter. She wanted to make sure her children were safe, that they were polite, and that they understood how to behave in a place like this. But mostly, she wanted this to be a positive experience, a memory of learning and joy. The manager took a deep breath, trying to calm the unease he felt. He adjusted his tie and forced a smile, hoping to appear professional. But inside, a mix of anxiety and doubt had already begun to cloud his judgment. He watched the children fumble with their piggy banks, tipping them slightly to show the coins inside, counting them out loud in small, careful piles. They giggled at the clinking sound, their laughter echoing lightly against the quiet hum of the bank. The mother knelt down to help them organize the coins, her voice gentle and instructive. "Let's count together so we know how much we have," she said. The children nodded eagerly, their focus entirely on the task. They had been saving for months using allowance money, small birthday gifts, and coins found around the house. Each coin represented a tiny victory, a step toward understanding the value of patience and effort. As the mother guided them, the manager grew more uneasy. He watched the children closely, his mind racing with assumptions he could not explain. He reminded himself to stay calm, to do his job, but the unease persisted. It was a strange feeling, almost like he was anticipating trouble where there was none. His eyes lingered on the children, their innocence a sharp contrast to the nervous tension building inside him. The mother handed each child a small paper form, explaining how to fill it out with their names and information. The children followed her instructions carefully, writing with small, deliberate strokes, proud of the letters they formed. Their excitement was contagious, and a few customers in line smiled at their energy and focus. This was supposed to be a simple, happy moment, a milestone in the life of a family teaching its children about responsibility and growth. But the manager's perception had shifted. He saw the children's small nervous movements, their whispered questions to their mother, and misread them as suspicious. His unease grew, clouding his professional judgment. He was no longer seeing a simple family visit. He was imagining scenarios that were far from reality. He hesitated, unsure of what to do, yet feeling that he needed to act. Finally, he stepped forward, clearing his throat to get their attention. "Excuse me," he said, his voice slightly tense. "May I see some identification for the children?" The mother looked up, surprised by the request. "Identification?" she asked gently, a hint of confusion in her tone. She had expected the usual questions about the forms, not a demand for IDs for her 7-year-old children. "Yes," the manager replied, his voice wavering. "It's bank policy. I just need to verify." He trailed off, unsure how to finish the sentence without revealing the uncertainty he felt inside. The mother nodded, trying to maintain patience and calm. She reached into her bag for a folder that contained documents proving the children's identities and handed them over carefully. The children, sensing the tension, stood quietly by her side, their earlier excitement replaced by cautious curiosity. As the manager examined the documents, his nervousness did not subside. Every little movement of the children seemed amplified in his mind, every glance or whispered word misinterpreted. What had started as a simple visit to teach a lesson about money had grown into a situation that the manager felt he had to control, even if he could not fully articulate why. The mother noticed his hesitance, and she remained calm, speaking softly to her children. "Just stay calm," she whispered. "We are here to learn, nothing else matters." The children nodded, trusting their mother's words, though they felt the tension in the air. They had never experienced a situation where a simple trip to the bank felt so serious, and yet they followed her lead, standing quietly, waiting to understand what was happening. As the minutes passed, the manager's unease escalated. He felt the need to involve someone with more authority, someone who could take charge if anything went wrong. And so, in a moment of panic rather than reason, he reached for the phone to call the police. He told himself it was a precaution, a standard procedure if something seemed suspicious. He did not fully recognize that what he perceived as suspicious was nothing more than 3 excited children visiting a bank with their mother, carrying coins in small piggy banks. The mother's heart sank slightly when she saw him pick up the phone. She could sense that the situation was escalating unnecessarily. She remained composed, speaking calmly to the children and subtly signaling that everything would be okay. She had faced challenges in life before, moments where people misjudged her or her family, and she knew that patience and calmness could diffuse tension far better than anger. The children watched with wide eyes as the manager spoke softly into the phone. They did not understand what was happening, only that something was different from the cheerful morning they had imagined. Their mother held their hands, reassuring them without words, her presence a protective shield in the small, polished bank. Inside, the manager continued to rationalize his actions. He had always believed he was careful, responsible, and attentive. Yet now, faced with a simple family outing, he felt his judgment clouded by fear and uncertainty. He could not see the truth clearly. These were innocent children excited to learn, accompanied by a mother who had come to teach them a valuable lesson in life. The scene in the bank remained tense, a mixture of innocence, excitement, and misunderstood intentions hanging in the air. The children, unaware of the gravity of the situation, fidgeted with their coins, whispered questions to each other, and tried to continue with the forms their mother had given them. They did not understand why an ordinary visit had suddenly become serious. All they knew was that their mother's calm presence made them feel safe. The mother looked around the bank, noticing the few other customers who had stopped their conversations to watch the unfolding scene. She smiled gently at them, hoping to convey that there was no jeer, only a misunderstanding. Her children mirrored her calmness, their small hands gripping hers, waiting for the next step in this confusing day. In that moment, the ordinary morning had shifted. A simple lesson about money, responsibility, and patience had turned into a test of composure, judgment, and understanding. The mother remained composed, her mind thinking ahead, ready for what might come next. She knew that this was a moment to teach not only her children, but also those around her about patience, fairness, and seeing clearly before acting. And so, the stage was set. A calm morning had become the beginning of a story that none of them would forget. A story that would test the hearts of a mother and her children, challenge the judgment of a man in authority, and set in motion events that would leave everyone in the bank speechless. The children clutched their piggy banks a little tighter, the mother's presence steady and reassuring. Outside, the world continued its ordinary pace, unaware of the tension building inside the small bank. Inside, each heartbeat, each small movement, each glance carried weight far beyond what anyone could have imagined. The simple act of teaching children about saving money had turned into a moment that would stay with them forever. A lesson not only in finance but in courage, patience, and the quiet power of composure in the face of misunderstanding. The mother's calm strength and the children's innocence would soon confront a challenge that no one expected, shaping the rest of the day in ways that would leave lasting impressions on everyone present. The quiet hum of the bank seemed to grow heavier as the manager's unease grew. What had started as a small feeling of discomfort had now transformed into a tense urgency inside him. He glanced at the mother and the children again, noting how they interacted, their laughter now a little subdued, their small faces curious but unsure. Every small movement felt magnified to him. A child's giggle sounded louder than usual, a whispered question seemed suspicious, and a simple fumble with a coin became, in his mind, a potential problem. He straightened his suit and took a shaky breath. The polite professional calm he usually maintained at work was slipping away. Something inside him told him to take action, to involve someone who could intervene if anything went wrong, and in that moment of misjudgment he reached for the phone behind the counter. His fingers trembled slightly as he dialed the local police station, the weight of the action pressing on him even before anyone had arrived. The mother noticed him picking up the phone. Her brow furrowed, but she did not panic. She had faced difficult situations before, moments where people misread her intentions or the intentions of those around her. She understood that fear and bias could cloud judgment, and she also knew that panic could spread faster than reason. She bent down slightly to whisper to her children, "Stay calm, everything will be okay. Just follow me." The children nodded, though their small faces showed a flicker of concern. On the other end of the phone, the manager's voice was careful, but strained. He spoke quickly, explaining the situation as he saw it, leaving out nothing, exaggerating little because in his mind it could be important. He described the children, their movements, the coins, the laughter, and how something about the whole situation seemed off. The officer on the line asked a few questions, calm but precise, trying to determine whether there was any real threat. The manager's answers, fueled by anxiety and assumptions, painted a picture far from the truth. The mother could see the tension mounting. She noticed how the manager's hands were shaking slightly as he held the phone, how his face had turned pale, and how the polite, neutral tone he had tried to maintain had now become something else entirely. She stayed composed, keeping her children close, speaking to them quietly, reminding them to breathe and to stay calm. She could feel their small hands gripping hers tightly, their fingers tangled with hers in trust and a shared sense of uncertainty. Around them, the few customers in the bank had paused their own business. Some watched curiously, sensing the unusual tension in the room. Others whispered quietly, unsure if they should get involved or stay out of what was clearly an escalating situation. The air, once light and ordinary, was now thick with uncertainty, with the subtle energy of fear and misunderstanding. The children, too young to understand fully what was happening, began to ask questions in their small, soft voices. "Mom, why is the man calling someone?" asked one of them. Another whispered, "Are we in trouble?" The mother crouched down to their level, her eyes meeting theirs filled with calm authority. "No," she said gently. "We are not in trouble. This is just someone making a mistake. We will handle it and it will be okay." Her voice was steady, filled with the quiet strength that comes from knowing how to navigate challenges calmly. While the manager finished his call, the mother adjusted the children's forms, helping them fill in a few more details quietly, trying to maintain normalcy. She wanted them to continue their lesson, to not let fear take over. "Remember," she said softly, "we are learning something important today. Nothing can stop us from learning." The children nodded, still anxious but reassured by her calm presence. Minutes passed, and the first sign of official authority arrived, the distant wail of sirens. The children's eyes grew wide as the sound approached, and the mother's grip on their hands tightened slightly. She whispered words of reassurance, explaining that the police were there to make sure everyone was safe, not to punish them. The children tried to stay brave, leaning close to her, holding their piggy banks tightly, their small fingers wrapped around hers. The police officers entered the bank, professional and alert. Their eyes quickly scanned the room, noting the family and the tense posture of the manager. They approached cautiously, asking calm questions, their tone firm but polite. The mother stood slightly in front of her children, a natural barrier, her presence commanding respect without raising her voice. She explained that the children were simply there to open their first savings accounts, that the manager had called them out of misunderstanding, and that no one was in danger. The manager, watching the officers, felt a mixture of relief and continued anxiety. He had expected a minor intervention, a simple check, but seeing the calm confidence of the mother made him feel smaller, more uncertain. She spoke with a quiet authority that came from years of leadership, experience, and the unshakable presence of someone who knew her own worth. His attempts to justify his concerns seemed hollow in comparison. The children, still clutching their piggy banks, were both curious and cautious. One of them asked in a whisper, "Will they let us finish opening our account?" The mother smiled softly, kneeling down to meet their eyes. "Yes," she said, "we will finish. Everything will be fine. Just stay calm and do exactly what I say." The children nodded, their small faces showing a mix of fear and trust. The officers listened carefully to both sides, noting the manager's nervous explanations and the mother's calm, precise statements. They asked a few questions about the documents, about the children's ages, and about the purpose of the visit. The mother responded clearly, providing exactly what was needed while keeping her tone gentle enough for the children to feel safe. The officer's professionalism helped reduce some of the tension, but the manager's nervousness remained, his earlier fear still lingering in every glance he gave. As the conversation continued, the children began to relax slightly, sensing the calm of their mother and the officers. They started whispering to each other, small reassurances and observations about the coins, about the forms, about the idea that saving money could be fun. Their innocence, patience, and natural curiosity began to contrast sharply with the manager's continued unease, highlighting the misjudgment that had led to this moment. The mother took a deep breath and addressed the officers directly, explaining that her children were learning an important life lesson about money. She described how they had saved coins, how they were responsible, and how this visit was meant to teach them about financial responsibility, patience, and growth. She did not raise her voice, did not express anger, but her words carried the quiet authority of someone who had faced challenges before and knew exactly how to address them with clarity and poise. The manager tried to interject, explaining again why he felt the situation was unusual, but the officers gently redirected him, asking him to step back and allow the family to explain. His hesitation, his nervous movements, and his quick glances around the room betrayed his continued discomfort. He had wanted to act out of caution, but in doing so, he had created a situation far more tense than anything that had actually occurred. The mother continued to guide her children, helping them complete their forms, explaining each step quietly. She encouraged them, praising their efforts and reinforcing their learning. "Look at how much you've already saved," she said softly, "and how carefully you are handling everything. This is exactly what we wanted to learn today." The children smiled faintly, their confidence returning slowly as they focused on the task, their small hands carefully placing coins on the counter. Outside, the sun continued to shine, unaware of the small drama unfolding inside the bank. Inside, time seemed to slow slightly, each second filled with the tension of misunderstanding and the patience of calm guidance. The mother's presence created a safe space in the midst of confusion, her quiet strength a shield against the anxiety around them. The manager, watching the family work with the officers, began to realize how much he had overreacted. His mind raced with self-doubt and embarrassment, the weight of his assumptions pressing down on him. He had called the police thinking he was protecting the bank, but now he saw that his fear had created unnecessary tension, that he had misread a simple, innocent situation. The children, still focused on their coins and forms, began to understand the rhythm of what was happening. They learned, even in this tense moment, that calmness, patience, and listening could turn fear into understanding. They followed their mother's guidance, trusting her, learning to navigate a world that sometimes misjudged them even when they were innocent. Minutes passed, each one stretching longer than it seemed necessary. The officers continued their questions, polite but firm, making sure everything was clear. The mother answered each question with composure, providing clarity without raising her voice. The manager remained in the background, awkward and hesitant, a clear picture of how fear and assumptions can cloud judgment. Finally, after what felt like hours but was only a short while, the officers nodded, reassured that there was no threat and that the situation had been a misunderstanding. The mother thanked them calmly, her children beaming, slightly relieved that the tension had eased. The manager stood quietly, still pale, still uncertain, but beginning to recognize the lesson he had just experienced about assumptions, fear, and careful judgment. The children hugged their mother tightly, whispering small words of relief and gratitude. They had faced something unexpected, something confusing, and had come through it safely because of her calm presence. The lesson was not only about saving money, but about trust, composure, and the quiet power of handling challenges with patience. The bank returned to its ordinary rhythm slowly, the few customers resuming their conversations, the soft hum of computers once again filling the air. The mother guided her children to the counter to finish their savings accounts, her confidence unwavering. She knew that this was more than a lesson about money. It was a lesson about resilience, understanding, and the importance of calm leadership in tense situations. By the end of this part of the morning, the children had completed their forms, learned how to manage their savings accounts, and experienced a moment that would stay with them for a long time. The mother had handled the situation with grace. The officers had ensured safety, and the manager, though humbled, had begun to understand the consequences of his assumptions. It had started as a simple visit to a bank, a small step toward teaching children about money. Yet in the course of those few minutes, it had become a story of tension, misunderstanding, patience, and ultimately, the quiet strength of a mother guiding her children through a world that sometimes misjudged them. And as they left the bank, hand in hand, piggy banks in tow, the morning sun seemed to shine a little brighter, the lesson of calmness, trust, and understanding lingering in the hearts of everyone involved. The air in the bank had started to calm, though a quiet tension still lingered, like a shadow that refuses to disappear completely. The police officers stood nearby, their expressions professional but alert, making sure that everything was truly under control. The manager, still pale and awkward, shuffled slightly behind the counter, unsure of what to do next. He had acted quickly, thinking he was preventing a problem, but now it was clear that the situation had gotten far more complicated than he had imagined. The mother remained calm, her presence steady and reassuring. She looked down at her children, kneeling slightly to meet their eyes, and whispered softly, "We are okay. Just stay with me." The children nodded, gripping their piggy banks a little tighter, but beginning to relax as they sensed their mother's confidence. Her calmness was contagious, spreading through the small group, and even the officers seemed to feel the shift in energy. Then something changed in the room. One of the officers, a tall woman with a kind but firm voice, glanced at the mother and said, "Ma'am, can you provide your identification?" "Just for verification." The mother smiled politely and reached into her bag, pulling out a folder that contained her identification documents. She handed them over carefully, watching as the officer examined them. For a brief moment, everyone's attention shifted from the children to the mother. The officer's eyes widened slightly, her tone changing from routine to something more respectful. She handed the documents back and looked at the mother again, clearly realizing something she had not expected. The manager, who had been standing rigidly behind the counter, froze, his heart skipping a beat. The mother's identification revealed her true position. She was not just any parent accompanying her children. She was the CEO of a well-known company, a person of authority, experience, and influence. The quiet confidence she had displayed throughout the tense situation suddenly made sense. The officers, who had initially approached her as a civilian, now realized they were dealing with someone accustomed to leadership, someone who handled challenges calmly and effectively on a daily basis. The manager's face turned pale, almost white. His eyes darted back and forth between the mother, the officers, and the children. He had thought he was handling a simple situation, but now he understood how deeply he had misjudged everything. The sense of control he had imagined he had was gone, replaced by embarrassment and a growing awareness of how badly he had overreacted. The mother, noticing his discomfort, remained composed. She did not raise her voice, did not express anger, but she let her presence speak for her. She had handled tense situations before, in boardrooms, meetings, and public appearances, and she knew that calm authority could accomplish far more than confrontation. She crouched slightly to meet her children's eyes, whispering, "Everything is fine. We are almost done." The children nodded, trusting her, though their small hands still clung tightly to her fingers. The officers, now fully aware of who they were dealing with, shifted their approach. They asked more questions, but their tone was respectful and careful. They asked about the children, about their purpose in the bank, and about the mother's plans for teaching them about money. She answered each question calmly, explaining the lessons she wanted her children to learn, the importance of responsibility, patience, and careful decision-making. Her words were precise but gentle, conveying authority without intimidation. The manager, meanwhile, struggled to regain composure. He had called the police thinking he was protecting the bank, and now he felt the weight of his mistake. His nervous glances at the mother and the officers revealed his growing awareness that his assumptions had been completely wrong. He had misjudged a situation involving 3 innocent children and their mother, someone whose presence commanded respect. The embarrassment he felt was tangible, a heavy weight pressing on him as he tried to understand how he had let fear cloud his judgment. The children, sensing the subtle change in the room, began to relax further. They whispered to each other quietly, their small voices filled with curiosity. "Mom, who are those people?" asked one of them. Another whispered, "Why is everyone looking at you?" The mother smiled, crouching to their level. "They are just people doing their job," she said softly. "Sometimes people make mistakes, but that is okay. We are teaching a lesson today, not just about money, but about how to handle challenges with patience." The children nodded, absorbing her words, learning something far deeper than they had imagined when they woke up that morning. The manager finally cleared his throat, attempting to speak. I didn't realize." His voice trailed off, unsure how to explain the mistake he had made. The mother looked at him, her expression calm but firm. "I understand that mistakes happen," she said gently, "but assumptions can create problems. Today we all learned a valuable lesson." Her words were measured, non-confrontational, but they carried the weight of experience, of someone who had navigated far more challenging situations with poise. The officers nodded in agreement, acknowledging the truth of her statement. One of them said, "We see that now. Thank you for your patience. You handled this very well." The mother smiled politely, focusing on her children. She had taught them something important today, not just about coins and savings accounts, but about composure, patience, and the quiet power of handling difficult situations with calmness. The children, encouraged by their mother's guidance, returned to their forms and coins. They counted the coins carefully, placing them neatly into the envelopes provided by the bank. The mother watched them, offering gentle guidance and encouragement, praising their attention to detail and their patience. Despite the earlier tension, they were learning, growing, and understanding a lesson that went far beyond money. The manager, still pale and embarrassed, moved back behind his count. Unsure of how to proceed, he had expected a simple interaction, a small family visit, and instead he had created a moment that would stay with him for a long time. He realized that fear and assumptions could cloud judgment, and he felt the weight of having acted too quickly, without seeing the whole picture. The officers, meanwhile, remained calm and professional, ensuring that everything was proceeding smoothly. They watched as the mother guided her children through the process, noting her patience, her clear instructions, and her gentle authority. It was evident to them that this was not a typical family visit, that the mother's presence had a powerful effect on the atmosphere, calming the children and even influencing the behavior of the adults around her. The mother, finishing the last steps of the paperwork with her children, stood and looked around the bank. Her eyes met the manager's briefly, and she gave a small, polite nod. It was not a gesture of anger or blame, but a quiet acknowledgement of the lesson that had been learned. She had turned a tense, uncomfortable situation into a moment of education, patience, and reflection. The children, now relieved and proud, clutched their completed forms and piggy banks. They looked up at their mother, their faces glowing with a mixture of excitement and curiosity. "Mom, we did it!" one of them exclaimed softly. The mother smiled, bending down to embrace them. "Yes, you did," she said. "And you learned a very important lesson today, not just about money, but about patience, understanding, and staying calm even when things seem scary." The manager, watching this, felt a mix of humility and realization. He had acted out of fear, out of a desire to protect his bank, but he had misread an innocent situation completely. The mother had handled everything with grace and authority, teaching her children and indirectly teaching him a lesson about assumptions, judgment, and respect. The officers began to prepare to leave, satisfied that everything was resolved. They gave polite nods to the mother and the children, acknowledging the unusual but ultimately harmless situation. "Thank you for your cooperation," one of them said. "It is clear that everyone is safe, and we appreciate how calmly you handled this." The mother smiled and thanked them, her focus remaining on her children. As the officers left, the atmosphere in the bank began to relax completely. Customers who had been watching curiously returned to their own business, some exchanging quiet smiles or whispers about the unusual scene they had just witnessed. The manager remained behind the counter, quietly reflecting on the events, understanding for the first time how a simple situation could escalate when fear and assumptions took over. The mother guided her children toward the exit, their small hands still holding hers tightly. They walked slowly, savoring the sense of relief and accomplishment. The children had faced a challenge, learned a lesson, and emerged stronger, guided by the steady presence of their mother. She had turned what could have been a frightening situation into an opportunity for growth, patience, and understanding. Outside, the sun shone brightly, illuminating the street as if nothing unusual had ever happened. The family stepped out, the morning air fresh and reassuring. The children's laughter returned, quieter but filled with relief, and the mother held their hands firmly, knowing that they had experienced something that would stay with them forever. The lesson was clear. Even in the face of misunderstanding and fear, calmness, patience, and authority could guide the way. The children had learned more than just how to save money. They had seen how composure and kindness could turn tension into understanding. The manager, humbled by the experience, had learned the importance of careful judgment and awareness. And the mother, confident and strong, had quietly demonstrated the power of calm, patient leadership. It was a morning that began with coins, forms, and simple curiosity, but it ended with lessons far more profound. Each person in the bank had witnessed the subtle but undeniable truth that patience, understanding, and quiet authority can turn fear and misunderstanding into respect and growth. The mother gathered her children and smiled down at them one last time before leaving the bank. "Remember this day," she said softly, "not because it was scary, but because it taught us something important about life." The children nodded, small smiles spreading across their faces, clutching their piggy banks with pride. And as they walked down the street, hand in hand, they carried with them not only coins and completed forms, but the knowledge that calmness, patience, and understanding could change the outcome of any situation. The bank had quieted down after the officers had reassured everyone that the situation was under control. The children were still clutching their piggy banks, their small fingers intertwined with their mothers as they walked slowly toward the counter to complete the final steps of opening their savings accounts. But the manager, who had been standing behind the counter, could not shake the unease that had settled deep inside him. He felt exposed, awkward, and humiliated all at once. He had acted quickly, calling the police because of a feeling he could not explain. Now, seeing the mother handle the entire situation with calm authority, he understood just how badly he had misjudged everything. His face was pale and he adjusted his tie nervously, avoiding eye contact as he tried to process the events. The officers, having seen enough to know there was no threat, had moved to a corner to observe quietly. But the manager's discomfort lingered like a heavy cloud, refusing to dissipate. The mother, unaware of the full extent of his internal turmoil, focused on her children. She knelt down beside them, guiding their hands as they carefully deposited their coins into the envelopes provided by the bank. Her voice was calm and instructive, offering praise and encouragement at every small step. "See how carefully you are counting each coin. This is important," she said gently. The children listened attentively, their faces lighting up with small smiles of accomplishment. The manager's eyes kept flicking toward them. He saw the patience in her movements, the calm authority in her voice, and the way the children responded with trust and confidence. Each small detail reminded him of the gap between what he had assumed and the reality of the situation. He had been quick to judge, and now he could see painfully clearly how wrong he had been. The officers, noting the manager's discomfort, did not intervene. They understood that this was a moment for reflection, a subtle lesson in humility for someone who had acted out of fear rather than reason. They kept a respectful distance, allowing the mother and children to continue, while maintaining a presence that ensured no one felt unsafe. The children, sensing the calm of their mother, began to relax further. Their whispers turned into small giggles as they helped each other with the coins, comparing amounts and quietly celebrating little victories. "Look, I have more than you," one of them said, trying to sound proud. The others laughed softly, nudging him with their elbows. The mother smiled, guiding them back gently. "It's not a competition," she said softly. "What matters is learning and being responsible with what you have." The manager shifted uneasily behind the counter. He realized that every action he had taken, every assumption he had made, had created unnecessary tension. He had let fear and bias dictate his decisions, and now he was confronted with the consequences. The mother, with her calm demeanor, had not only guided her children but had also exposed his mistakes without raising her voice or showing anger. She had transformed a potentially tense situation into a moment of learning and reflection. As the children finished their final steps, the mother guided them toward the officer who had checked her identification earlier. She thanked them politely, acknowledging their role in ensuring safety, but she also made it clear that the misunderstanding had caused unnecessary stress. "We appreciate your presence," she said gently, "but it's important to remember that assumptions can create problems. Today was a lesson for all of us in patience, understanding, and careful judgment." The officer nodded, appreciating the measured way she had handled the situation. She could see that the mother was teaching her children an invaluable lesson, one that went beyond coins and savings accounts. The children watched, fascinated, as their mother spoke with calm authority, understanding even at their young age that her words carried weight. The manager, standing behind the counter, felt a pang of guilt. He wanted to apologize, to explain that he had acted out of fear rather than malice, but he could not find the words. The mother's calm demeanor, the officer's professionalism, and the children's trust in her created a subtle but undeniable pressure. He realized that any attempt to justify his actions would fall short. The only thing he could do was reflect, silently, on how his assumptions had caused unnecessary stress. The mother, sensing the lingering tension, addressed him gently. "I understand that mistakes happen," she said softly, her eyes kind but firm. "We all act based on what we think is right. But it's important to pause, observe carefully, and consider the whole picture before taking action. Today, my children and I experienced something that could have been very different if not handled carefully." The manager nodded slowly, his shoulders slumping slightly. He understood the truth in her words. Fear and assumptions had clouded his judgment, and now he had witnessed the power of calm auth. The mother encouraged the children to think about what they had learned, not just about saving money, but about handling unexpected situations. She asked, "What would you do next time if you saw someone getting nervous or scared like that?" One of them replied, "I would stay calm and try to help like we did today." Another said, "I would listen and not make it worse." She nodded, impressed by their insight. Even at their young age, they were understanding lessons of empathy, patience, and leadership, skills far beyond their years. Meanwhile, the manager, still at the bank, took a long moment to reflect. He realized that the mother's calm authority had not only guided her children, but had also indirectly taught him an invaluable lesson. He had acted out of fear and assumptions, but her composure and measured approach had shown him how unnecessary tension could be diffused through patience, respect, and careful observation. The lesson was clear. Leadership was not about control alone, it was about understanding, humility, and guiding others with calm authority. The officers, having left the bank, also reflected on the day's events. They recognized that what had begun as a tense situation had been resolved not through force or confrontation, but through patience, clear communication, and calm guidance. The mother had transformed a potentially stressful situation into a learning experience for her children, while also showing the importance of respect and understanding to everyone involved. Back in the park, the children counted their coins carefully, sharing small tips with each other on how to keep track and save efficiently. The mother listened, offering gentle encouragement and guidance, praising them for their attention to detail and responsibility. The lesson had come full circle, from fear and tension at the bank to reflection, learning, and pride in their efforts. After a while, the mother gathered the children close. "Remember," she said softly, "what you learned today is more than just about money. It's about patience, understanding, and knowing how to act wisely. People make mistakes sometimes because they are scared or don't have all the information. What matters is how you respond. Stay calm, be patient, and help others understand. That's a lesson you can carry with you always." The children nodded, taking her words to heart. They understood, even in their small way, that the day had been about more than coins and forms. It had been about navigating challenges, staying calm under pressure, and learning how to respond thoughtfully when situations seemed confusing or unfair. These lessons, she knew, would stay with them for a lifetime. The mother then suggested they take a small walk through the park to enjoy the sunshine and reflect on the morning. The children skipped ahead lightly, their laughter filling the air, a sign that the tension from the bank had completely dissipated. The mother followed at a calm pace, her eyes scanning the surroundings, but her mind was still replaying the lessons of the day, not just for her children, but for the people at the bank as well. The manager, sitting quietly behind the counter hours later, finally began to regain his composure. He had made mistakes, but he had also learned something powerful. Assumptions and fear could lead to unnecessary actions, but patience, observation, and understanding could transform tense situations into opportunities for learning and growth. He made a mental note to approach future situations differently, to pause, consider, and act with clarity rather than fear. Back in the park, the mother guided the children toward a small cafe nearby, suggesting they celebrate the lesson with a treat. The children were thrilled, excited to enjoy a small reward after a morning filled with tension and learning. As they sat down and enjoyed a light snack, the conversation turned to their savings accounts, the coins they had counted, and how they planned to continue saving in the future. The mother listened attentively, smiling at their growing understanding of responsibility and planning. One of the children asked, "Mom, will we ever go back to the bank?" The mother chuckled softly. "Yes, we will. But next time you will know what to expect and we will handle it calmly just like today. The important thing is to stay patient, understand the situation, and act thoughtfully." The children nodded, taking her words seriously, understanding that life was full of unexpected challenges, and that calmness and patience could guide them through each one. As they finished their snack and walked back toward their neighborhood, the mother reflected quietly. She knew that the morning had been unusual, stressful even, but it had been full of lessons. Her children had learned about responsibility, composure, and empathy. The manager had learned humility and the importance of careful judgment. Even the officers had witnessed how calm authority and patience could resolve tension effectively. It had been a day of teaching, learning, and growth for everyone involved. The children, energized and happy, skipped ahead on the sidewalk, occasionally turning back to chat with their mother. They were still holding their piggy banks, proud of what they had accomplished. "I saved so many coins," one of them exclaimed. "And I learned how to stay calm," said another. The mother smiled, listening to each child, reinforcing the lessons with gentle reminders about patience, understanding, and responsibility. The sun began to tilt slightly in the sky, casting long shadows across the streets. The mother guided her children through the familiar streets of their neighborhood, their conversation light but reflective. They talked about what had happened at the bank, what they had learned, and how they would act in the future if they ever faced a tense situation again. The lessons had been subtle but deep, and even at their young age they had absorbed them with clarity and understanding. As they reached their home, the mother gathered the children in a warm embrace. "Today was more than a visit to the bank," she said softly. "It was a lesson about life. You learned how to stay calm, be patient, and handle situations with understanding. Remember this day because the lessons you learned will guide you for years to come." The children hugged her back, their small arms wrapped tightly around her, a sign of trust and love. Later that evening, the mother reflected quietly on the day's events. She thought about the manager, the officers, and the few other customers who had been in the bank. Everyone had learned something, whether directly or indirectly. A simple morning outing had become a profound lesson in patience, calm authority, empathy, and understanding. It had been stressful at times, but the outcomes had been transformative, teaching lessons far beyond what anyone had expected when the day began. The children went to bed that night with smiles on their faces, still holding their piggy banks, proud of their accomplishments and the lessons they had learned. The mother watched them sleep, knowing that they had not only learned about money but about life, patience, and composure. It had been a long, unusual day, but one filled with learning, growth, and understanding that would stay with them forever. And so, what had begun as a simple visit to the bank, a small, everyday task, had grown into a story of tension, misunderstanding, patience, learning, and growth. The mother had guided her children with calm authority. The manager had been humbled. The officers had witnessed effective leadership, and the children had learned lessons they would carry throughout their lives. The day ended quietly with lessons learned, confidence built, and a family stronger and wiser for the experience.